Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast, twice weekly now. I'll get that right one time. Of course, I'm joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes. James, of course, has had a bit of a rough weekend. How you feeling, mate?
I'm doing all right now, but yeah, had a bit of a thing overnight. Ended up in hospital, but all well. At the moment, wasn't a great night, but we're on the mend. Everything's all good. Otherwise, it's just a night I won't forget for some time. But otherwise, all good.
Yeah, one of the beauties of getting older. I know, like when we did Thursday show, was mentioning the fact that I have a lung issue. And I run up the fucking stairs. I can't breathe now. It's I get these big, huge clots that come up like every other day. So I'm trying to work out what is going on. So the beauties of getting older. I think I
Yep,
sneezed about 2 months ago, and I pulled them off on my shoulder. I remember getting hit by a car at
crazy
19,
shit.
getting up and walking it off. Now I'm like sneezed wrong. I'm nearly paralyzed.
Yep.
So one of the beauties of getting older, mate. But nonetheless, lots to talk about. Just a few days since we did our last podcast. And as usual, United have been heavily in the news. JJ Gabriel signing a new deal, which is very, very encouraging. We were hoping United would get him locked down. Lots of other stuff to talk about. The Brentford sporting director, of course, gave an interview a couple of days ago. We'll cover some of the things that were said in that, possibly Ollie Watkins, Gyökeres, and a few other things. So lots to get through, matey. Let's talk about that Brentford sporting director interview first. Said there's obviously lots of interest in Mbeumo, which is not a surprise. Said that he was comfortable with staying with the club for another season if the right offer didn't arrive. They're not desperate to sell him. I don't think any of those particular comments. I wouldn't expect anything different from a sporting director. If I'm a sporting director, I'm not coming out and saying the player desperately wants to leave and won't stay because it obviously weakens your negotiating position.
Yep.
And I'm not going to turn around and say I want to, accept as little as amount as possible. Would mean it would be idiotic to say anything different. But did you see anything in that interview that made you feel the outcome could be any different?
No, I mean it's with a lot of the public figures like that, sporting directors, managers, things like that. It's like who, until the players signed is how they act and how they talk. And so there's not too much, obviously, whenever he gave that interview in particular, until there's full agreement, the club is always going to be sitting there saying, yeah, of course we want to get a good offer. We want to get an offer that meets our demands and things like that. And once you have full agreement and everything's working, they're still likely to say something like, yeah, we're getting closer to something happening, or maybe he'll depart or something like that. So didn't read much into it myself. I think it's easy to get riled up if you listen to him, but it's kind of like managers in press conferences, they lie. And so does everybody else when it comes to these types of things that are ongoing. They never want to comment on any of it, really. They don't really discuss it in particular. Would Mbumo be happy to stay there? Probably not. He's pretty strongly pushing for the move to go through to United this week to make sure that it's on time and he goes into training fully when intended and all of that. But it's okay, and it's all well and good for an executive of a club to come out and protect their interests. That's their job. They're doing their job. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, not a big deal. And if Mbuma wanted to stay and they wanted him to stay, this conversation wouldn't be happening. As we've said many times, these deals are lined up long in advance. So
Yep.
Brentford will know. And I'm sure, Mbuma knew that Thomas Frank was going to leave too.
Yep.
Norgard's already gone. So I think for him and for Brentford, I think he's got 1 year left on his deal, if I'm correct in saying.
Yes. Yeah. And they have a +1, but it's not so easy to sell players during that +1. So
Yeah. And the thing is if we've seen with United players, you take unhappy players into a season that have had promises made to them, then promises broken. What are Brentford going to get for a year from now, even if you exercise the 1 year clause?
yeah.
So to me, they're not as that's not how you want to keep a player anyway. So I still feel that they will get done. I know it feels like a saga, James, but it's a saga because we're doing 2 podcasts a week and talking
Yeah.
about it
Yeah.
non-stop, and so is
Yep.
everyone else. I mean, there has to
Yep.
be a bit of patience and space where these things operate and take, a certain trajectory with patience, with measure, with composure. it's easy to look at Chelsea signing João Pedro and Liam Delap, but they're not. That's not a realistic model that you can compare yourself with. I wouldn't even, if United had the money in the PSR room to do it, I wouldn't want them to recruit like that.
No, me neither. And their success rate with those transfers is actually extremely low. And and we can maybe talk about that a little bit. That point of like, the Villa today talking about selling off the women's team, things like that. These are things that I don't think would be accepted at United. I mean, I could imagine the backlash if Ineos said, "Hey, we're selling the women's team, to Ineos, or we're selling the women's team to Trawlers, and we're selling Carrington, and United is no longer as a unit going to be owning all these properties, and we're just going to sell it all off so we can go spend more money." I don't think fans would accept it as they might at some of these other clubs. I'm not sure it's a good way that football is going for those things to be kind of normalized and for these clubs to be stripped apart like that. So no, I wouldn't really want United to be doing the kind of what they're doing. It's, to me, it's really reckless, and it's
Well,
cold.
I, I agree with you. I also think that once you have a situation where financial rules and regulations are incentivizing this type of
Yeah,
thing, then these
correct.
are unintended consequences.
Yep.
Look, I respect the fact that the Premier League and UEFA, which I'll get into a little bit later, I can't understand how there isn't some type of federalized rule between the two of them, so
Yeah.
things like this don't happen. But whenever you have situations like this, I understand bringing in financial regulations, and you're going to have unintended consequences. No system will be perfect, and then you have to address that. But to me, it's an obvious flaw in a system whenever you have Chelsea being able to sell a hotel and then come
Yeah.
PSR and then sell their women's team, and then you have situations going on where you have teams trading players on swap deals like the Minte one that Chelsea and Newcastle did, and players that are massively valued above their market value, but it's works for both parties. Like, to me, there has to be some type of modification on these rules that
Yep.
doesn't incentivize that, James.
Yeah, for sure, 100%, because it is all about the rules, and the rules create the landscape in which the game is played, and so the landscape has to change, the outlines of it have to change, so that these things aren't forced to happen, so clubs don't have to do this to feel like they have to compete. But yeah, on the other side, again, yeah, Mbumo, I'm sure will be happening in a decent sense, and just on that, one thought on it: tomorrow is July 1st. To turn over the financial year as well. We know Brentford with Norgard, with Thomas Frank, they've gotten some money in. It may well be to a degree as simple as these things happen that, a big sale going on the books for them after July 1st is just better for everybody involved. These things can happen. These things can be part and parcel. There was an article about that, about how there's a bunch of deals in between Premier League clubs and others, like sitting kind of waiting for July 1st, simply because if you can get it on the most recent year, because it's like this 3-year rolling average, it's better for you, especially as a selling club, since you count it right off the bat, you count it all in one go, to make sales after July. If you're not in danger of violating PSR, make the sale in July. That way you have all this, that sale counts for the next 36 months for your financial situation. So it'll be it's an important week. They're really close in contact with, with Brentford on getting this done. They've had conversations in the last 12 hours, I believe, on this to work out what the next thing is. So I'm not worried about it, but you're right too. It feels like a saga because we follow so much of it, but we still have to me, the deadline's always been a week from now, right? It's the preseason. You got to get, getting another good player in. As long as he's in by preseason, I'll feel pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I would too. Of course, the other striker signing, one of the other ones that's been heavily linked with United was Gyökeres, and the sporting president, of course, Federico Veranda, said that you would need to be the worst agent in world football. And I want to just elaborate on that comment slightly, because it seems that there are people out there that don't understand how players get sold and the role of an agent. If a club wants to sell a player and put them on the market, they're not ringing around clubs saying, "Do you want to buy this guy?" That's not how it works. They go tell the agent, "This is what we would accept for your client." And the agent's job is to go out and find clubs willing to pay that fee that their client would actually go to.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is what, of course, Veranda's talking about. This is not a video game. You're not just putting a player on the market. And these are human beings, right? And
Yep.
to represent them effectively, you're told you bring the offer to the club. Now, of course, there are clubs that get offers that are unsolicited for players they don't want to sell. But if you want to sell a player, then that's how it gets done. They're saying they're valuing Gyökeres not at the fee they agreed to sell him at, but at a fee that's consistent with what the likes of Cunha and Buemo are going for. What do you think about this?
I mean, I can understand on that front, 75 million euros when you look at his goal scoring record and all of that in this market isn't that crazy. I mean, when João Pedro is going for 55 million pounds, when Jamie Gittins is going for 55, 60 million pounds, I look at those and I think it's not really overpriced, is it? Just like, if I were to I would pay more, we talked about Mbumo's price in the past, and it's like it feels a bit inflated, but at the same time, 65 for Mbumo is a better deal than 60 for Jamie Gittins. 65 for Mbumo is a better deal than 55 for João Pedro, and I feel the same about Gyökeres. So it's inflated, but it's inflated because clubs, especially Chelsea in particular, keep spending all this money and keeping the prices high. In that respect, they are inflating things to a degree. So I think he's got a point on that it's sensible. Now at the same time, I do think that one has to be conscious of the fact that the Portuguese league is not one of the top 5 leagues in the world at this moment. That they haven't had European success in a long time since Jose Mourinho, right? They haven't been, from on the European stage, they've diminished quite a bit um, over the time, and I would say that as well, that has to factor into the price of the player too. But the weirdness of it, I think, is if he had an agreement with the representative of Sporting, it should be honored, in my opinion. If it was factually agreed with the sporting director last summer, Hugo Viana, to do that, whether he's there or not really shouldn't change that. That's one of those things where I don't feel it's right when clubs do that. They like staff change, but when you're an executive appointed, you do speak on behalf of the club. Whether you're there or not, that shouldn't particularly change. Now, any fool can say something and someone can take them at their word for it and not get things in full commitments from the club themselves, which should be done. But still, it happens all the time. A lot of times, players and agents are going off of promises that people have made that end up not getting stuck to, and I don't think that's right when that happens in any circumstance.
When was the last time Gyökeres got a new deal at Sporting? I didn't look at that.
Well, he's been there 2 years,
Okay,
so
so normally I would have blamed the agent for not getting this in writing,
yeah,
but obviously when Gyökeres signed a contract with Sporting, this wasn't, getting a
correct,
50
yeah,
million release clause wasn't, a priority because, that was an unlikely event that he would want to be able to leave
yeah,
after 2 years. So, and how do you get that in writing? 6 months ago without the club. The club's not going to agree to that,
yeah,
obviously. So verbal agreements are not worth the energy it took to move them,
yeah,
especially when it comes to things like this. Um, obviously what Gyökeres has to do is to make retaining him unattractive as possible for Sporting. That's not the
yeah,
way anyone wants to leave a football club, but to me, when this is where I sympathize with players. It's very easy for fans to come out and tear players apart for wanting to leave clubs,
yeah,
but clubs are also looking out for their own specific commercial interests. Clubs don't not all clubs honor agreements with players, and sometimes the club that you love has enormous amount of responsibility for creating this situation. So, to me, I don't know what else Gyökeres could do for Sporting. He went there, gave him 2 years, was exceptional for them. They didn't pay a huge amount of money. They're going to make a major profit. I mean, I'm struggling to understand why they're going to price him at a point that they can only price him at if there's other top clubs interested in him that he will go to, could go to,
yeah.
that are willing to pay that. And I don't think anyone outside of United is willing to do it.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Arsenal seem to be kind of stringing him along a bit. Maybe they'll do it in the end, maybe they won't. But as of now, it feels to me strongly like they keep dragging him behind as their alternative to Benjamin Šeško. So, it just doesn't seem particularly clever from Sporting to manage it the way that it is right now, but obviously they're
Well,
within their rights to do so.
what's going to be interesting, James, is the priority, of course, for United is to get the Mbumo deal done, then move on to getting players out.
Yep.
So I would imagine the next few weeks will be focused on that, unless things start happening quickly, which I don't think. I would be surprised if it did, but who knows? Maybe clubs are waiting until July 1st to move these deals forward. We'll see.
Right.
But we could still be talking about the Jacare situation, will he, won't he, a month from now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely could. And I think to a degree, United are probably sitting right on it by doing that in this case, because the market on strikers is a bit thin in general, because some of the other targets like Ekitike and such are so expensive, because Osimhen is, so expensive in terms of wages. It probably is the right strategy to wait it out a bit, look at alternatives and things like that, get your sales lined up, get your other things lined up. And that way, if it does become an easy deal to do or an attractive deal to do, or the price becomes reasonable and the player's ready to make the commitment, it's something that could be done quickly. It's better to do that than,
Okay,
than,
but then do we say that we Jokeris has to be the next signing, so we don't sign anyone else in those other key positions? Because to me, I would be a bit uncomfortable.
no, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm asking the question. I
Yeah.
don't know. Do you think that's what you need to do? Do you need to then prioritize signing? Okay, if we can get one more signing done before the window, we don't expect to just get one more. But if we had to pick one more, our next priority in our list would be signing a central striker. I personally think that United need more than the front three that
Sure.
they're bringing in. And look, when you get to the second half of the window, there's a lot of good players available at prices that weren't being quoted a month before because
Yep.
clubs need to sell. You'll be able to
Yep.
pick off one or two players from Chelsea at a relatively good, decent price, knockdown price, or some of these other clubs that'll be looking to sell. So I don't think that it's a catastrophe if United are completing the squad in August. But as we've said before, they have to be in a position, James, to hit the ground running against Arsenal.
Yeah, agreed. And it's an interesting point. Do you wait? Do you say, look, the strikers are biggest need, so we're gonna sell, keep money set aside for that, and if we have more sales than expected, we'll go make some other transfers? Or do you, when you're selling, if you can't get your guy and you're not sure, do you go and move on to those other positions? Do you go for that midfielder? Do you go for that goalkeeper? Do you make those signings and say, we're just going to get all the things we need to get done? But, obviously the risk of that is leaving you short where you don't have the money to make the striker signing. It becomes available that you want. And I think that's a big decision to be made. And I also think that's why alternatives, checking into different alternatives and opening up more options than that, to where if you were to decide, hey, we just need to go get the striker now because it's going to hold up the rest of our business if we don't do it, do we have an actual option that is worth signing? And that's really the important part of it, is you got to always have your alternatives and other plans that could work as well.
Look, if you go into the market right now, you're looking for a striker in its prime that no one outside of the Premier League is the guarantee comes with a guarantee, right? Even in the Premier League, we don't know, but outside of the Premier League, there's always risk. Gyökeres is one of those few players that's in his prime that stands out that you would go get if you're a football club that needs a striker. And after that, it is plan Bs and plan Cs that just don't tick as many boxes. We talked on this show a week or so ago about Ollie Watkins being a potential alternative. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
And I had said, I think we were both in agreement that if you can get someone like Ollie Watkins at a decent price, you take Ollie Watkins. That's a guy, mate. If you can add another 10, 15 goals to United's front line, we're talking about a completely different season than what we saw last season. It's the type of player that wants to play at the World Cup next season. At the end of the season, who's in the running, who's a goal scorer, who's at the right age. And to me, if you're bringing Watkins into a game or starting him, that to me is better than what United are starting with right now.
No doubt about that. I agree. And look, I mean, Ollie Watkins is truly no slouch. I mean, he averages over 15 goals over the last 5 seasons. He scored the third most goals in the entire Premier League, behind Mo Salah and Erling Haaland, at Aston Villa. and that is not something to shrug off. That's a serious player who has a really good record. He plays in a way that I think Ruben Amorim would really like. He knows how to find the net. He's a goal scorer. He's creative. He's been a part of different units and continue to maintain good production. The adaptation period, that's one of the things we've heard quite a bit that they've been focused on this year too. Premier League proven guys who can come in, make an impact right away, lower risk. And you do have a lower risk when you're getting a player like Ollie Watkins, who's been around the Premier League a lot, because it is a different league. It's a different league, and there is a difficulty. And I think that, when you look at it, the other thing I would, add with Ollie Watkins, he's barely ever missed a game in his career. Like literally practically never missed games in his career. I think he missed 2 or 3 last season with just some basic things. But besides that, never had an injury, never had anything serious in his life. And so I think he would make a
when
very,
it comes to United.
I know, right? But
Yeah, he'll be here about 6 months to live after about 2 weeks in United.
he might get a couple of years because he doesn't have an injury history. He might last a little longer than somebody else here.
Come in now looking like fucking Tom Cruise. He came out looking like a Chernobyl janitor after about 2 weeks. Shannon Tatum coming out looking like, Jesus, what happened there? Oh, just a training session at United. I was looking at his stats, James. At 22, he was scoring 10 goals in 45 games in the Championship, the same where Hoyland is.
Yep.
I say that because we brought it up on last week's show about what Gyökeres was doing at 22.
Yeah,
scoring
similar. Yeah.
5 goals in the second division of the Bundesliga. And to me, they're better players for having that development away from big football clubs, from big scrutiny, where they can develop, where they're not being slaughtered, and how important that is. That's part of me would like to see Hoyland loaned out for a year or two in a league where there's not that type of scrutiny on him every week and can develop, because I still feel like there's a really good player in there. Maybe I'm an idiot. I think it's really risky to rely on him for next season as a striker, because you have to assume he's going to be similar to what he was last season, but I don't want to give up on him. I think it's a player 2-3 years from now, if United sell him, he would be someone we'd regret.
Well, I think that it's something that if you sign a player like Ollie Watkins, you can start to think that way, because you can say we've got Rasmus Højlund, we've got Cheeto Obi, and they've got this young kid, Enzo Cannavia, who's going to go out on loan for a year. And you think, well, that's 3 young strikers, young players at different stages in their careers.
Who was the third one? Bianchi? Biancheri? Are you talking about Biancheri? Or are you talking about...
No, Enzo Cana. He's not been officially announced yet, but he's this young from Le Havre, the French team.
From Le Havre?
Yeah, they bought him.
All right, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about someone who was...
No, it's just my bad pronunciations, It's just my inability to speak European properly. No, but they'll loan him out to Lausanne for a year, and you never know. And so if you get someone like Watkins, what it also allows you to do is reevaluate in a year. Maybe you don't need to buy another striker at that time. Maybe Watkins can give you 2 or 3 years while these guys can develop either at United or away from United, and actually have something out of all 3 of those prospects. You need one to really become a good player for you. And I think that's, I've said before that when I did some research on it, that's how a lot of these players became really good. A lot of the best strikers came in at a young age to a team, and they learned behind somebody who wasn't necessarily like world class. They didn't have to be, but somebody who was there, who was solid, who was experienced, and who could play for multiple years and take the pressure off of them, and that they could learn from in the team in different circumstances. And so, on that front, I think it gives you a really potentially big boost. So I like it. I like a lot of things about the deal. The other thing that could work on this is Garnacho. Garnacho's options are pretty limited. Again, Chelsea have bought Gittins and João Pedro. They still haven't made a real offer for Garnacho that didn't include maybe something on Nkunku that United aren't really wanting to pursue. Where's he going to go? Stays in England. Villa have had an interest. They have expressed an interest in him. They have their PSR issues. This is where United could maybe take advantage of these rules that we talked about and say, well, Garnacho's worth 60 million. If João Pedro's worth 55, Garnacho's worth 60. we pay a bit less for Watkins. Both clubs get a huge profit on both players that enables them to go into the market, that helps them balance the books, make one of these deals work in our favor for once. And it could work out for both clubs. And that's an opportunity as well.
But this is the problem with letting clubs know that you need to sell. Is now they're going to set increase that pressure on you, knowing that you need this to operate, to move, and so they're going to exploit your desperation, your need to sell. And that's the difference, between clubs that can ask big fees, because appraisal of footballers is not an exact science, right? There is no Cali Blue Book, right? It all depends on how badly do you want the player, how badly does the club need to sell, how badly does the player want to go. All these variables that determine the price. So when you look at that, you're thinking that it's something that with Garnacho, I look at and go, how has he been allowed to be this badly advised? You only behave the way you behave if you have a guaranteed option to get out. And to me, we had a debate about this last week. I got some grief over people who thought I was defending Marcus Rashford too much, and I probably am to be fair. But I look at what Garnacho is going through, and I'm thinking, one, I don't think Chelsea's the right move. You should learn from Jadon Sancho on that.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was the right move for Liam Delap either. And as you can see...
by the way, on that, Giovanni Quenda signed for Chelsea, and now they've signed, 3 more wingers since then, and he's going to join them next year. He's going to be 12th in the line by the time he gets here. What a silly decision that is.
Yeah, I can understand. Chelsea wanted me, I'd go tomorrow, right? But if you're a footballer in demand where you can choose your next move because there's lots of clubs that want you, I can understand why an agent would push you there because I'm sure it's very lucrative. But for these young kids, there's only one player can play in your position.
Yeah.
And that means there's 4 or 5 others who are exceptional talents just like you who won't play. And even then, you've got Maresca that has a very specific way he wants to play. You might not need to be the guy that starts, just may be not the best player, but the player that does what Maresca wants. And to me, that's just suicide for a young player. But Garnacho, young player that, to me, the way he's behaved, James, so much of it was avoidable that is so self-deprecating and so self-harming that I've said this to you on last week's pod. It wouldn't surprise me that when United start the season, Garnacho is still at Manchester United. And what's more, his behavior when he went away to Malaysia was really disrespectful to me.
Yeah,
you're wearing the football club badge. Think about the history of this football club. The legends. That goes back decades. The Duncan Edwards, the Munich. Best Law, all the great players that have played for this football club. Have some respect for its badge. Behave a certain way. I can understand being pissed off and not to do things, but have some respect. To me, that it's pivotal for Amorim to get Garnacho out. It's pivotal for the culture, but it's not an easy sale, James, because there's not a lot of people that can buy him.
Yeah, agreed. And that's why I've looked at this, and I do honestly wonder if it isn't a part of as well the thinking on, with this Watkins thing too, and just being clever about it, because there's a way then, because Watkins also had a little bit of a falling out with Unai Emery.
Drop for Rashford, bizarrely.
Yeah, and he had some reason to complain. I mean, when you look at his numbers, he was still performing very well. He didn't really deserve to not be, and he's been a very good, committed player for Villa for quite a long time. And it seems like him and Emery just don't quite see eye to eye. So, that's why I look at that and think it's a potential situation that could really just be a win for everybody, out of a non-ideal situation for everybody. And I think that's probably what is attracting United to a degree, beyond the fact that Ollie Watkins is a good player who, on his own merit, probably deserves to play for a big club as well. But I like it, and in that respect, it's fine. But I think United's strategy on this is just, they're going to have to wait a little bit, like you said, work on those outs, make checks on different players, and be ready to move. And part of that will also be, how does it develop on things like that Garnacho situation? Is there real interest that comes in? Are there real offers that come in, for him? Because there's a few things like that, like with Jadon Sancho as well. his situation's been kind of evolving. Now Juventus are pretty strongly in for him at this point in time. They might offer a player. There might be a situation where Juventus are looking at and saying, "Look, we're willing to take him. We're willing to buy him. We're willing to work a deal out here, but." Maybe there's a way you could take somebody we got here, that could work. Maybe I'm just suggesting it's possible, but there's a lot of, when you're talking about selling players, there's, I think, a lot of creativity that might go into that, and having to think with what opportunities do present themselves. And you can have all your great plans. There can still be opportunities that aren't bad things, as long as you're ending up in a positive situation out of the end of it. So some of it is certainly a wait and see when it comes to the outs and how they're going to affect the following decisions after, Mbumo. So
One of those, of course, outs was Marcus Rashford. Fabrizio Romano saying that Villa have not chosen to activate the 40 million buyout clause. I don't know exactly what is going on there, but that headline could be a bit misleading in the sense that it's very possible that one of the reasons why they didn't activate that 40 million is because Marcus Rashford didn't want to go there on a permanent basis.
I would suggest that's probably the primary reason, right? I think maybe if they'd gotten into the Champions League and some of the other options were potentially presenting themselves, that he might have considered it, and everything. But as we know, I mean, we saw plenty of reports last week from England, from Spain, and such, that Barcelona are still continuing to maintain that interest, even if they sign Nico Williams. And even today, apparently, they're having some real trouble with getting Nico Williams over the line and getting that deal actually done even. So, there's certainly an interest there, and the will of, the player preferring a move to somewhere like Barcelona is certainly a factor in that. But yeah, I mean, they would have triggered it if he wanted to be there. I'm pretty positive about
Well,
that.
and here's the other part of that. And again, I don't speak from precision of knowledge, but if United can get their business done without the 40 million Marcus Rashford fee being required, you do a loan deal with Barcelona where it's mandatory next summer, where it has to be activated after a certain amount of games or whatever. You don't give them. I suppose you legally have to have an out like they had with Jadon Sancho, where because there's things that can happen between there's three parties in that transaction, and maybe two of them, Marcus Rashford and Barcelona don't come to an agreement next summer or what have you. But it might also benefit United to get that money next year.
Yeah, it well could. Getting just some wages saved, and then at the moment some significant wages saved, and getting the other sales, Anthony, Sancho, potentially Garnacho, off the books, then having another profitable sale next season isn't necessarily a bad thing at all. And the other factor I would just add on that I think people really do need to bear in mind is that United do owe him a lot of money on his contract. They gave a contract. I mean, it's very easy for people to kind of forget about that, but Marcus Rashford has 3 years remaining on a pretty significant contract, and it's not the same. Players are entitled to that money, that those deals and those contracts. And we saw Harry Maguire not move because of that, at one point to West Ham just 2 years ago. And it may be a simpler scenario where a year from now, there's less years on the contract, less money owed, and that means United actually end up with more if they make a sale at that time from a profit standpoint than they would if they were to sell him today.
Well, I don't know. I suppose it's hard to get another club to pay 11 billion a week.
11
plus,
billion is a lot, isn't it?
yeah, plus 400 bars of Go Billion, and plus free subscription to.
The Lamborghinis are all included weekly, right?
Yeah,
Weekly
I mean,
Lamborghini
yeah.
stipend.
So, yeah. So obviously, the reported figure about Marcus
Yeah.
Rashford wages is total and utter nonsense.
Yes. Yeah. As it usually is.
Close.
We saw it with Cunha and Mbumo as well.
Yeah.
People were trying to do that. Yeah.
I don't know why this is still a thing where people feel the need to inflate figures when it comes to United to give some subtle inference that United are incompetent financially. And here's a way. This is a subtle way to, as a pejorative insult against this particular player. You can go after them because it's very targeted and very specific. I saw
Yeah.
an article earlier saying ex-Manchester United and England midfielder Paul Ince gets arrested for drunk. Like, you can play one game for Manchester United and play your whole career somewhere else, and whatever you get in trouble later, you're going to be ex-Manchester United player.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking at that now. Did he not play for Liverpool? Did he not play for West Ham? Did he not play for Inter Milan? In fact,
There's
when
only
he
one
left,
United, Phil.
he hated United,
Yeah.
right? I remember when he went to Inter. I remember, when he was at West Ham, the West Ham fans hated him for posing in the United shirt before the deal was done. And I remember in United's 3-3 game with Liverpool, United were 3-0 up. Liverpool came back to 3 each. I think he scored in that game, and how much he celebrated and how much he talked about how other teams wanted them to win the league more than United, which is fine. I'm okay with that. But it's funny how Manchester United's name in anything makes something relevant and a story.
Yep.
Paul Pogba walking his dog. This is a story. They released that story on the day City won the league, and the Paul Pogba walking his dog story got far more interaction on social media than Man City's, we
So
won the
funny.
Premier League tweet, right? Which,
Yeah.
Paul Pogba walking his dog is more of a coincidence, more of an incident to people than City winning the league. Of course, this was borne out, James, by the ridiculous screeching and pearl clutching over no one. If you win the Europa League, you shouldn't qualify for the Champions League. It wasn't mentioned again as soon as Spurs
Yeah.
won. I mean, it was
Disappeared.
disappeared.
Never happened again.
Remember during COVID, we had those crate competitions where people were climbing on crates and falling off, and then it just fucking disappeared into nowhere. And I'm like, did that really happen?
Yeah.
Same thing here. Piece of positive news: JJ Gabriel, new deal, very, very encouraging. Got another 2 years at United. One of the widely recognized best young talents in football. His father is Irish, so hopefully we can get him signed up for our national team, which is most unlikely. Nonetheless, delighted to see him stay at United.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good, especially obviously the youth team in a little bit of a flux at the moment. But again, as we expect it to be competently turned over, Nick Cox still there, part of the transition under them and all of that. But it's just good. We've seen a lot of positive things out of United in the youth levels recently with some of the signings, with some of the promotion and things like this with JJ Gabriel staying is, I think, excellent news to say, hey, one of the best young talents who's already got endorsement deals and things lining up at his age, is amazing stuff, that wants to stay and play at United. And these are only good things for the future. They're only good, representations of where things are going at the youth level, because this is the stuff 5 years from now that matters, that you don't remember 5 years back. But this is big. These are big things that do make a difference. And obviously it also implies, that the culture there is good and is an environment that some of these young players are feeling like they can succeed in, that they can thrive in, that they can grow in. And that's why he wants to stay. So it's a win certainly for everybody. There was another young player too. I just wanted to make mention of that. I'm not going to pronounce his name correctly. Jaden Ngwashi is also set to stay at the academy, who was also a good, very highly rated young player who was looking potentially at leaving, and he's staying too. So some good things. I mean, United keeping their best young talents and poaching them from others. This is what was happening. What some of these best academies were doing is just they were keeping their best players and they're poaching all these other ones. We're kind of starting to see that at the United Academy again.
Well, instead of Chelsea trying to pay 50 million for Bino Gittins, who's been taken from an English academy, gone to Germany, developing, same with Musiala, everything else. This is why the likes of Johnny Evans' appointment as someone who's in charge of pathways is really, really important. This is one of the key elements of getting the Aiden Heaven deal done and the Chidobe deals done. Was there's a pathway to the first team, and both of them played in the first team. I mean, with Aiden Heaven almost instantly, and young players are looking at that going, okay, this is a football club that is willing to play its young players, that's willing to give them an opportunity where there is a pathway into the first team. That's usually why they go to places like Southampton and go to places like Brighton and what have you, because there's a pathway into the first team. So that is going to be a really key aspect of United's future development and a key attribute of Ineos's identity, where they have to go out and sign these really promising young players that are capable of stepping in and playing at the highest level. You just have to give them a chance. I mean, I was really surprised at the level of Aiden Heaven when he first came in, and how quickly he was able to handle playing Premier League football in a tough Manchester United team. So very encouraging. JJ Gabriel. I mean, we I would be surprised if we have to wait 5 years before.
No, probably not. Not even close to that. Yeah.
Yeah, very,
He
very.
already made an under 18s debut, and I would expect maybe a year and a half, 2 years, he'll be around, in there, which is quite incredible.
Yeah, very, very much so. One of the things that also came out before we were in between this recording this podcast was the Premier League getting access to locker rooms, as you would call them. Americans would call them dressing rooms. Interviews of players on the bench. They're going to have access to training sessions. Players are going to be mic'd up, what have you. Now, in America, that saturated coverage is very, very common. Different sporting cultures and what have you. Steelman, for me, why that's a good idea, because I don't think it is.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you my thoughts on the positives of it. One of the things I think it does really well is to humanize the players quite a bit more, because I do think that in America people feel a lot more connected to the players themselves, that they feel like they know a bit more about them as people, as individuals, as things like that. Like, I look at basketball, for example. Basketball is probably the most intrusive sport for this in all of in all of them. You look at like the NBA finals, you watch it, they're interviewing the players who are playing in between the quarters, during a commercial break. They interview them, ask them about the quarter. They're asking a player about an injury that just happened to one of their teammates and things mid game, and doing things like that all the time. And I think the positive of what it does is that you learn a lot about the personalities of these individuals and get to know them in a bit of a different way, because we've seen so many assumptions get made about so many individuals that are flat out wrong about how they are, who they are, their attitude. They're sulky, or they're this or they're that, or they're disinterested. I just one in that respect I see a positive. What if you were hearing from Paul Pogba mid-game, instead of people saying he's a lazy bastard and he's this and that, looking at it? What if you hear from him a little bit more? Because a lot of times, for most of these players, I say most, for most of these players, when they speak, I see people tend to give a bit of a positive feedback to a lot of them. A lot of them can be very well spoken and give honest feelings and things like that. And so that to me is the main positive. Is I think you can connect to people a little bit more, maybe know them a little bit more, and understand them a little bit more, and maybe it helps with some of the way that some people are treated, because I think people have the wrong impression about so many of them. And the only other factor I would say, this is definitely much more of an American view on this, is that we are the consumer, we are the customer, and they're getting paid a lot of money to play sport. And so I don't think it's a crime to ask for a little more access to them, as at the end of the day, entertainers and entertainment, even though it's, it's not like WWE.
To me, like, I recognize what you're saying, where my opposition to it is there's so much coverage now. I don't watch 99% of it because it's just completely diluted. A
Yeah.
Manchester United manager's interview used to be really interesting to me. I
Yeah.
would watch it. Now there's 14 of them. And I'm
Don't you think the
watching it.
mid-game one would be different? Like,
No, because
really honest?
but here's the problem with that. I'm reminded of a situation where United played West Ham away,
Uh-huh.
and Rooney scored, Mickey scored. United went 4-2. They came from behind 3-2, and puts his face in the camera and utters an expletive.
Yeah.
Well, the camera was shoved in his face, to be fair. If you're going to interview athletes, anyone, in the heat of the moment, and then suspend them for saying something in the heat of the moment.
Sure,
This is
sure. I hear
this is
you on
this
that.
is
I hear you on
ridiculous.
that.
Like,
Yeah,
can you imagine, this in reverse? Can you imagine, like, Ruben Amorim with a microphone after Jeff Freeze was just shagged his wife and go, "All right, Jeff, can I get your thoughts on that? Was this your best performance? I mean, could you give us some change? You had a change in tactics there. It seemed like, the last 20 minutes, you went from, you were on top, and then there's just some. You go into a dressing room and there's 16-year-old kids getting changed in there.
yeah,
Like, to me, I
yeah.
don't need to see it. I don't
Sure, sure.
I don't want a camera shoved in a player's face when I'm sympathetic. To me, if you want to get to know football players off the pitch, what they're like as human beings, don't interview them when they're at work. If
Sure.
if you interview me at work, you're not going to find anything meaningful about how I am as a human being. They tried to do that through the internet. And there was a period when footballers were on their own social media on Twitter until they realized this is impossible, because there's
I
just
loved it though, to be honest.
I
Like,
know
I
there
mean,
was
the tweets that Wayne Rooney used to send are
yeah,
like forever
and we
in
lost that
history.
game. Why did we lose that?
Yeah.
Because
Oh, I know, because it's not trained and it's not,
well, just one player once turning around and saying "fuck off" in response to
yeah,
a ton of abuse. The player gets suspended. Like, to me,
yeah.
it's just like I don't. There's some things I don't need to see, and to me, there's such like there's so much of it rendered to me now not worthy of watching, because it's just like footballers know how to answer questions by not answering questions.
Mhm.
And we've talked on this podcast about the importance of not letting players have access to their phone
Yeah.
immediately after a game. I just don't see any I mean, Ferguson, the likes of Ferguson would have went mental with this. I understand your argument that we are the product, but to me, there's a limit to where that product has entertainment value, and it's going to differ for everyone. Like the Club World Cup, all this saturation just is rendering football.
Yeah.
Now, if normally I would be glued to every game, now there's another one on tomorrow. There's another one. It's just endless. Pep Guardiola yesterday talking about the NBA, saying they've 85 games, but they get 4 months off.
Yeah.
Footballers get nothing off. And
Yeah.
now their Club World Cups, and now they want to stick a, they want to get a glimpse at their, their colonoscopy. Like, to me, there's a limit, and there's young kids in these dressing rooms. Do I need to see a young kid live on TV with a towel wrapped around him? That's a minor. That's
Yeah.
17, and you want to
Yeah.
like. There's just some places the media don't need to be. Like I wouldn't like it if I was a journalist and there's a footballer standing beside my bed going, "Hey Joe, what like just the more scrutiny you put on a human being's life, the more you're going to find idiosyncrasies and little things that are imperfect. And the human being, the human mind will forget about the 99.9% of things that are right about this person and focus on the one negative. And I think for me, there's a violation of it's too far. Like, to me, the Premier League should be watching the Club World Cup, trying to get an atmosphere back and trying to get a product back that isn't losing viewers. Then that.
Yeah, and look, I hear that, and the thing that I think about most is my experiences, and I think that it's really just about how it's done. When I was growing up, we used to watch Inside the NFL on HBO. It's still going today, by the way, but back in the day with like Bob Costa and some of these guys back then, and and they would cover all the games from the weekend, and there's a player mic'd up in every game and all that kind of stuff as well. And it was, one of the reasons it was on HBO at the time is because it was pretty real. Like, it was very real stuff. Not media trained, not prepared, not all of that. So, a lot of swearing, a lot of stuff like that. Nobody got in any trouble for anything, at that time and in that environment and in that place. And I felt as a fan, as a watcher, that it helped, that I understood the sport a lot more and what it was really like because of that. And that is what I would
I'm
hope
with you
for.
100%.
Yeah, and that's what I would hope for. Do I think that they'll do it right? Not necessarily. So it's more like, to me, I'm not against theory in concept. It is purely about execution from my standpoint. How is it executed? Because I agree with you very much on the sense of, like, there's certainly things you don't want to see, and there's certainly things where it's pointless if it dulls the natural, like, then I don't know what you call it, the organicness of the whole thing. It's pointless, if it's like that. A player can't swear, a player says this and they're in trouble, and a player does that just, then you're asking people to be media trained when they're playing football, and that I don't like at all because I don't think it's right. You don't want to you're trying to remove and neuter and control the emotion of the game to make for a better TV product is not the idea.
Yeah, but see,
So in that
this is the
sense,
issue.
I agree. Yeah.
Is can you imagine what for a young United player to have personal things revealed and then go on a bad run of form or something? Like
Yeah.
that stuff is going to get used against that kid. And not some players don't like that. Some players want privacy. I most definitely would not want to be mic'd up in the middle of my job, right? Because you're going to see a certain personality inside to me that is just specific to this one circumstance. But if you want a curated product that doesn't have any flexibility in it and any ability to acknowledge that human beings have imperfections, and if you want some type of rehearsed sanitized product that has no that has no creativity in it, that's just a same transactional bullshit, I don't want to watch that. Like, that is
Yeah.
nonsense to me. Anything that doesn't have any there's no such thing as a human being that's 100% perfect. They don't exist anywhere,
Yeah.
right? Nobody. It's we've all got similar fears, anxieties, doubts, and errors. And there's errors that I've made in my life that would be devastating to me if I had been out before social media. There were stupid mistakes, not serious. I'm just mean like stupid mistakes, things that I've done with other people where I've been, treated them wrong or whatever,
Yeah.
where I've said things I shouldn't have said, or fought with people I shouldn't have fought with, treated, women, whatever, dumb, would go out with women, not calling back and stuff, just nasty stuff that I'm not proud of later that comes out. I don't want all that stuff spliced with me. I have children, right?
Yeah.
And to me, like, I don't want to see inside their lives. Here's the thing, James, and you know this. When you spend most of your life trying to get inside information in a football club, and then you get to a point where you get it, it's really disappointing. Because when you get it, right, it's like, none of this is as salacious and interesting as I thought it was. It's just boring human shit. The same shit that's happening in every office, every construction site, every place of
Yeah, the
employment.
conspiracies are
It's
not
the
are not
same.
nearing the truth.
Yeah, my boss likes him more than me. I got bollocked last week for that, and he didn't. And there's favorite. This all the same dynamics you get in any group of human beings. It's just not that interesting. So to me, they're trying to look for something that isn't there. Like,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, to me, the product on the field is what we need to focus on. But yes, I understand different. I think that may be it, Manny. Do we have anything else that we're missing?
Darren Fletcher to the under
Let's
18s. I think that was the last thing.
Yeah, Darren Fletcher, under 18s, of course. Was reading about it just before I come on here. Who's one of the individuals that are being interviewed or being considered for that position. To me, that would make sense.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I mean, Darren Fletcher, obviously good player, knows the club inside and out, has been there for everything. Well, it should really be noted he's like one of the only surviving individuals from, the Ineos apocalypse. Like one of literally the only people who has survived it in the entire club of note. And everything I've ever heard about him, people have been loved the guy, impressed. I mean, for Sir Alex used to talk about him in certain ways, and everybody loves him. He's got an incredible rapport with the young players. So he's super intelligent. He was as a player, is as an individual in there. Two kids in the academy too, and all that. But I think makes a ton of sense getting somebody who gets it, who understands it, who knows what it takes, who gets on with the kids really well and help them with that pathway, that exact, front, just take that big step into under 18s and then move on from there is huge. And I think he'd be an excellent individual for that.
Yeah, I would agree. Someone who also is very familiar with the way NEOS work and, of course, the long-term vision. It's someone that United need more of, the likes of him and Johnny Evans, who are people that are very well liked and extremely good at their certainly Dan Fletcher is, and I think Johnny Evans will be an exceptional appointment for United. Someone that truly loves the football club and has the right cerebral mindset for that particular job. All right, matey, we'll leave it there. We'll be back again on Thursday. Thanks to all of you for downloading the podcast. As always, thanks for all of your likes, retweets, shares, subscriptions, what have you. If you're on YouTube or anything, please subscribe to our channels. It's always the best way to support the show. All right, mate. I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. See you later.
Feel better, mate. See ya.